Hello, this is Ethica America, where we check in to see how America is doing. We are your hosts, Aaron, and
Shit, I forgot my line.
it's you.
Oh, okay. I'm Ryan. That's right.
And what do we got today?
Today we're going to be talking about the news.
The news.
You
Well,
know,
there's nothing wrong with the news. All you got to do is Google something, and
it's-
everything's right there, and there's nothing wrong with that information. You don't have to
nah.
fact check it. Everything's correct. Everything is unbiased, and no one has any other alternative motives to giving us information about what's going on in the world.
I
All
mean, you're
right.
absolutely right, and that's why I click on the first link always on Google. Always has sponsored next to it,
Yeah.
which means that the information itself is sponsored, and nobody sponsoring information is ever going to lead me down a rabbit hole that you know. I,
Exactly. And it's not like we have to fact check those journalists because they're journalists, and their whole job is to give us accurate information that's unbiased, whether they worked for um, NBC News or MSNBC or CNBC, which are all owned by the same people, Comcast, or whether you're looking at Wall Street Journal or the New York Post or Fox News, which are all owned by News Corp and Rupert Murdoch, which, wait a second.
See, I get all my information from Facebook, so I don't even know these names that you're talking about. So,
Oh, well,
yeah.
luckily, Facebook, they get like 60% of their revenue from right-wing supporters.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I
Huh.
found that out from a quick Google search, and I'm not going to fact check that, but it's probably accurate.
Oh, that's fair. I mean, the last time I was on Facebook, I got an advertisement for the benefits of drinking your own pee. So now I'm starting to do that, which is going to be the next fad diet. Uh,
Well, luckily we
yeah.
have lots of Facebook groups where all of them will tell you the correct way to live your life, and they're probably all definitely not snake oil salesmen.
No, no. I mean, yeah. I don't really drink my own pee, by the way.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
Man, I vaguely remember something about drinking your own pee. That's good for something, but
Uh,
I mean that probably
it's
was just from a Facebook group that I read.
I mean, I used to be in nursing for like 5 years.
Hmm.
There's nothing good about drinking your own pee. And I don't
Well,
feel like I needed to be a nurse to tell you that, so
I mean, it's like 90% water, right?
well, yeah, but I mean, it's the toxins that your body's trying to get rid of, the byproduct of certain reactions. It's mostly urea and, like, water and salt.
Well, 90% of it's fine. And if we were
Okay.
looking at our normal drinking water, I mean, our normal drinking water from the tap has like uh
It's
that
got fluoride.
yeah, those chemicals are in toothpaste. So I mean,
Oh, man. Yeah, and I only, well, I'm not gonna go into what I brush my teeth with, so
oh, okay. It's probably pee.
yeah, maybe.
All right.
Found it on a Facebook group.
So
Ah,
the news.
alright.
I
So, I mean,
mean,
I think oh, good.
all right. So my issue with the news is it's hard to find actual information that's unbiased, honestly. I mean, if you're just like doing a quick Google search, I mean, you're just going to read topics, and then that's written by a journalist, or it's written by someone that just was like, "Hey, paper, I have this cool article that I want to write about," and they're like, "All right, here's $100, go promote it," or let's
Right.
just you know plant it into our site, and here we go. I mean,
I mean, I kinda oh, go ahead.
you can't really like I mean, you can fact check it, but like the purpose of news is to actually just like get accurate information so you don't have to fact check it. I think we're at this point of our like news area is you have to kind of fact check everything. You have to kind of be your own journalist, and you have to do those deep dives so find out whether or not the information that you're reading or listening to is actually correct.
I mean, yeah, I'd completely agree. I kinda liken it to taking your car to a mechanic, okay?
Mhm.
So you're taking your car to a mechanic, and they're a business that's looking to, profit, which that
Right.
makes sense. They're doing a service for you know, whatever. But the thing is, the more they can profit off of you, the better. So if let's say that you took your car in just to have the brake pads changed and they're like, "Whoa, you need a complete transmission replacement." So that bill just went up from, we'll just say $200, right? To about I mean, you're talking thousands of dollars at that point. And if you had fact checked it yourself, right, then you might have found out, oh, it's actually just that I was low on transmission fluid and I'm fine. Being
Right.
knowledgeable and being, how do I want to put it?
Mhm.
Being an advocate for yourself.
Yeah.
Whereas if you just blindly believe everything that you read or hear, you're going to run into a lot of issues. Like,
But I feel like at some point in our history, like, that was the purpose of the news. Like, it was there to kind of keep our I have a baby that's crying.
yeah, she's just upset because she found out that you shouldn't trust everything on Facebook. Her whole world's blown right now.
I love when people are like, "I read this on Facebook," and I'm like, "Oh boy. Well,
Yeah.
did you fact check it?" And that's like something that you shouldn't have to do. You should just I I mean, I know that it's something that you should do, but, like, it is
Mhm.
the at one point, I feel like it was something that we didn't have to do. We didn't have to go fact check what we're hearing about the news because that's what the news was there for. It was there to kinda keep our politicians in check and be like, when they say something, the news goes, "Wait a second. That's not
Well,
true. You said this, and you're now being a hypocrite." And that does still happen, but there's also, like that's like 5%. I don't know that actual 5%, but there's just like a small percentage of that's what the news is actually there for, and it's do fact check what people in power are saying or doing and going, "Hey, this is actually what they're doing." But you also hear
well,
people on like Reddit forums doing the same thing of like, "Hey, they actually did this and they said this." And
yeah, I could see that. I mean, but that's not the only reason that the news exists. I mean, if you just found out like that, let's say you're from a small village in I don't even know where, in this imaginary country,
Mhm.
and there's a village 5 miles away. There's no Uh, you got horses, but there's no cars or anything like that. You're basically just Amish. Um, so like somebody from a neighboring village has traveled, well, let's say they're 50 miles away, but somebody from a neighboring village, they've traveled all day to get to that village. I mean, if there was a threat there, you'd like to know that. If like,
Right.
the crops are all dying out there, you
Mhm.
might want to like figure out, okay, is this a plague? Is this going to affect us? I mean, part of it's just being nosy, and part of that nosiness is really just kind of looking out for your own society or yourself in that instance. Um,
Yeah, that's true. Yeah,
if a
there are different parts of news. There are, like, informational things that are going out, like the weather. Like, you go into the news and you check out the weather. What's the weather gonna be like? Or,
Mhm.
what happened I mean, now you could just pop on any news station and you can just read about the latest school shooting, and that's nice. It's nice to
Yeah.
just have that information or mall shooting or, I mean, basically any big shooting. I mean, most of the news coverage or news stations will just give you all the information, and in most cases, it's just, "Here's a bunch of facts about it," and then when they run out of facts, then they kind of impose their own, uh
Opinion.
yeah, they impose their own opinion on it, and that's, I guess, what I have an issue with is now we have too many opinions,
Oh, yeah.
and
Yeah, and I'd agree.
those
They don't
opinions build
sorry.
mountains out of molehills, or what's that
M
phrase?
Mountains out of molehills, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it and they tend to polarize each other
Mhm.
or be polarizing towards each other, I should say. So what you hear if you were to hear 2 entirely different or sorry, the same story, one
Yeah.
told by Fox, right? And
Mhm.
then another one told by CNN, you might not even realize anymore that you're hearing the same story.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Like,
Mhm.
with the amount of skew and bias that they put on everything. Like, let's take your school shooting example. Fox News might be talking about making bulletproof backpacks mandatory for your kids,
Mhm.
right? But you pop over to CNN and they're talking about banning weapons, right?
Right, yeah,
But
that's kind of where, uh, that line is drawn or where the difference is they're gonna have different solutions for it, or Fox News will say, "We need to arm the teachers," and then CNN will go, "Well, we need to ban assault rifles," or "We need to get those red flag laws back into place," or "We need to go back to, what, 2008 when we did have an AR ban."
yeah,
I think it was
yes.
I mean, that might have been around 2008. I don't forget what year it was, but
Uh, I mean, we could pop in the time machine from the first episode,
oh, yeah, we could.
but we probably save that for later because I don't remember the sound effect that the time machine that the sound, the time
I
machine makes.
I think it was a ding. Ding.
Was it? Oh yeah, it was a ding. And then I was thinking of the SpongeBob SquarePants. Leedoo, leedoo.
Yeah, yeah. That
Yeah,
kinda also
yeah.
reminds me of the Minions too.
Oh, yeah, I could see that.
Yeah,
So, but the minions are much smarter than SpongeBob and Patrick. So,
probably.
yeah.
Vanessa
So, well,
Squidward, he went to college.
oh yeah, he majored in clarinet. He's really living his life.
He did.
Yeah. But so in historic terms, the news wasn't always like that though.
Mhm,
Um, Believe it or not, the news was largely spread by word of mouth for most of human existence. And it'd be weird, like let's say that you were a farmer just outside the city and you saw a traveler going past, right?
mhm,
It might be of the utmost importance that you talk to that traveler and ask him, "Hey, like, what's going on in that colony over there? Because we see a lot of smoke,
mhm,
and we don't like that." It kind of makes sense that how do I want to put it? That news would be so important to a group, if you understand what I'm saying.
mhm,
Um, and let's be honest for a second, like literacy rates, they weren't always so great. Like the average literacy of a New Englander in like the mid 17th century was about 60%, which is a lot higher than I thought that it would be, by the way. So,
That does seem kinda high, actually.
right. Well, I'll get to something else in a second, but
Uh-oh.
it rose to about 75% in the late 18th century. Now, like I said, I was always taught that that literacy rate was much lower,
Mhm.
but we do have to consider the source here. And do you have any idea what the biggest demographic audience was that would have been polled at this time?
Was it, rich and, educated?
I was just gonna say white males.
Oh, okay. I was gonna
Yeah.
guess, like, they only, interviewed people that were educated, so, of course, that they're gonna only talk to people that are literate because they're only talking to people that are educated.
Wouldn't it be really funny if that was the case and it was still only 60%?
Right? Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
that would be funny.
So, yeah. So anyhow, we're talking about white males for the most part.
Mhm,
So, I mean, I could provide so many examples about this sort of misogyny and racism throughout history, but for today, we're just going to try to focus on the news. For reference, even though word of mouth was the predominant way of spreading news, that's not to say that the news was unimportant. On the contrary, the news was still very important. Like we established earlier, it informed villagers of when soldiers were coming. It could be relevant for everything from crop growth to the collapse of other civilizations. But in order to talk about modern news, we have to take it a step back and talk about the root of what made mass media possible. That would be the printing press. And the invention of the printing press made it possible to passively communicate the ongoings of the world with each other. While J I never know how to pronounce this guy's name, but I think it's Johann Gutenberg, but it's spelled Johannes, so I always get confused whether it's Johannes or Johann, but I'm gonna go with Johann for the rest of this, podcast.
it sounds
So,
German.
I didn't actually even look up where he was from. I thought it was, like, Denmark or Sweden, but it
Maybe
very
it's
well
not
could be.
German. Gutenberg
Uh,
does sound like
Johann
I should just Google it.
Yeah, that's what I was doing. Gutenberg. Oh, he was German. You were on
Oh,
point.
man.
Yeah. Look at you go, living your best life.
Man, I don't know how I
Yeah.
guessed that.
Maybe a name like Gutenberg
It
or
might have been.
Johannes or Johann. I don't know. But anyhow, so Johannes Gutenberg, while he's credited with creating the printing press in 1455, he really wasn't the first person to create a printing press. So China had actually started employing the idea of using wood blocks that they would carve out the letters for and kind of roll it over
Mhm.
paper or have paper rolled over it, and further refined it to a movable type of printing press in about 11th century, probably. And maybe this invention wasn't as good as Johann Gutenberg's printing press, but the idea that I wanted to bring home is that printing has been around for much longer than you'd think. But the first true newspaper was a weekly newspaper out of Strasbourg, Germany, in 1605 called Relation. Um, oh, sorry, it's called Relation aller Führungen. I can't pronounce that, but it's
It's
commonly
probably
just
some
referred
German
to.
word.
Yeah, well, yeah, and I'm not fluent in German at all, so I'm gonna butcher a ton of things this time around.
That's okay.
Um, but it's just commonly referred to as the relation or relation. Um, in English, it translates to the collection of all distinguished and memorable news, which fancy for him for having all the distinguished and memorable news.
Yeah, good for him.
Um, yeah, I know. I mean, Facebook has all that now, so
And Jeff Bezos has that now since he owns what's he own?
Washington Post.
Yeah, he owns Washington Post.
He also owns another one or two. Maybe it's Amazon that owns them, but Washington Post is kind of his baby, which makes sense. I mean, Seattle, Amazon.
Mhm. I wonder,
Makes
how
sense.
he feels about unions in his, newspapers.
I'm sure he loves them.
Yeah, he's probably
So,
pretty pro-union.
yeah, yeah. And he would never hire AI to do the writing for him. Though AI might actually be more accurate than,
It
you know.
prob it probably would be. He'd probably be like, I don't like this AI. I'm gonna program it to be a little bit different."
Alexa, read me the news.
No, not that news, the other news, the one that I wrote.
The
Yes.
good news.
The news that
So,
tells me I'm great.
right. So originally this we'll just call it the relation from here on out. But originally the relation is son of a bitch. Hold on. I gotta turn my Amazon Echo off. It just popped on the news.
Uh-oh.
But anyhow, so originally in the relation, these were handwritten articles that were written and delivered by one dude. So you can imagine how much work was involved, I guess I
Right.
should say.
Yeah. Yeah, it kinda reminds me of, like, the, conductors back in the day where they had to, like, handwrite all these oh my god, why am I blanking on the word? Composers writing all of their pieces. Like, just handwriting, like, furries or something like that. It's just crazy to
Oh,
me.
yeah,
But then,
yeah.
like, writing the same thing for all the parts of the orchestra.
Yeah. I mean, that seems like a lot more fun to me though, but uh, I don't know. It seems exhausting simultaneously. But
Yeah.
at least like once it's written for them,
Mhm.
right? Like he's just done.
Right.
He doesn't have to keep doing this day after.
No.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Yeah, he doesn't have to keep doing this day after day after day. But our uh our dude who I don't even remember what the guy's name was. But this dude was handwriting these articles and delivering them, right? But he was delivering them mostly to the wealthy in the area at that time. So he might only have to write it. And it's not like a full newspaper either. It's just like front, back, maybe 4 pages in total or something like that. So it's not like he was writing everything from obituaries to classified ads, I guess
Right.
is what I'm trying to say.
So it's just one dude writing, like, 4 pages times 100 for 100 different people.
Yeah, yeah. I
That
mean,
sounds like a
yeah,
lot.
and he might I didn't look into how often this periodical came out or anything like that, right?
Mhm.
But it might have been like once a week that it was delivered or something like that. I mean, it was a brand new idea. I mean, other people had obviously came out with books and stuff like that, but to continually sell somebody on stuff that you're writing,
Right.
that's a brand new idea for this time.
And that's like a
Um,
full-time job writing, like, 400 pages a week.
yeah, yeah. And I didn't even look into like how long he did this for either. So, like, I know, like, eventually after something like 4 years, he bought a printing press, which
I would have bought it much sooner, but then again, who
I
knows
mean,
how much they were
it
costing.
had only came out, like, maybe 150 years prior to that. So, I mean, we're talking 1455 versus 1605, so, like, 160 years. I mean, first you'd have to, figure out where to buy a printing press. I doubt that there's any place that's just like Printing Presses RS or anything like that, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, there's probably a Walmart.
Oh god. Is Walmart still called Walmart in Germany?
Probably.
Mhm. I mean, it'd be consistent with their brand.
Yeah.
So, yeah. But anyhow, so one of the first issues was about the financial difficulties the government was facing, right?
Mm.
And less than 2 days later, it was decided by quote unquote unknown sources, though almost definitively, by the way, it's the government, that the newspaper needed to be more careful before publishing anything critical about the government.
Oh, well, luckily that's all changed now. And
Oh yeah, yeah.
also, the government knows exactly how to handle its finances.
That's an excellent point, right? And, like, his solution to all this, by the way, wasn't to come up with, like, some sort of censorship board or anything like that. His solution was, "Well, I guess I'll just censor it myself."
Yeah.
So we're adding on to his, list of responsibilities at his weekly paper or whatever it is. Poor guy.
Yeah.
But, so funnily, this is, like, the first form of government censorship within, you know well, I shouldn't say within written media. But the first form of censorship of what we could consider a newspaper,
Mhm.
right, happened after the first issue came out within, like, 2 days of it.
Perfect.
Yeah. So, and, I seem to remember us doing an episode where we lightly discussed government censorship.
Yeah, and we
Yeah.
found out that warning labels are okay, but
Yeah,
government
yeah. Yeah,
censoring
we
is
shoulda
not. So
yeah, you
luckily
shoulda
this
just
is
put a
over.
parental advice. Yeah.
Yeah, luckily
You
this isn't
shoulda just
over in Germany, so
Yeah, yeah. So, and they're super lighthearted over in Germany, yeah.
probably.
Mhm. If you're interested in that particular episode, make sure to check out our, other podcast episodes. Plug here.
Oh, yeah. You
So,
wanna listen
yeah,
to, our last episode about censorship,
parental.
parental advisory.
Yeah,
That's what it was called.
yeah, yeah, yeah. We did a thing. So while the news might have started off small, I think we can both agree that it evolved in a pretty major way since then. Um,
Meh, nah, I think it's news is still pretty, no one really pays attention to it, and, it's pretty small still.
I don't know. I mean, I'm
No.
always looking for my latest celebrity gossip. So,
Yeah. Yeah, that's a
yeah,
news thing, I guess.
yeah, Us Weekly. Yeah, you know that those villagers who were like 50 miles apart who saw the traveler, they were like, "Have you heard or seen from the Britney Spears? Yeah."
Yeah.
uh, uh, but no longer from this point did we really have to deal with handwritten newspapers because times were changing from the technical, business, political, and cultural standpoints. So more people could read. Newspapers became cheaper to print, and thus more affordable. And life was just amazing, except for the dysentery.
Oh, yeah, but
Yeah,
they don't know about that
that'll
yet. It would come in the news later.
no. Yeah, that's a good point. Once they play the Oregon Trail, is all they're going to be thinking about, though. Oh, I died so much from dysentery. It's always dysentery.
My issue
So,
was I really liked shooting the buffaloes, but then I couldn't hold all that buffalo meat.
oh, that's a good point.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I just imagine like this family of four, right? Three of them have died, so it's just this one guy, and he's just sleeping on piles of buffalo meat.
Yeah.
Whatever, though.
And
So anyhow,
you can only hold so
okay.
many axles.
Oh yeah, God, and the axles always broke,
Yeah,
even on easy mode. Actually, I
right?
don't know if there was an easy mode. I
I
think
don't
there were
know.
modes in that game.
I don't
I
think I
don't
ever
know.
made it there though.
Mhm. About the card game,
Mhm.
it wasn't as good. It was actually just kind of boring. It's like, oh, okay, this seems familiar. It feels familiar, um, but just not. really as friendly as you'd hope.
I wonder if there's an app game for it.
I'm sure there is.
I mean, it sounds like the
So,
perfect idle game where you're just like, "Oh, I had to just make it to Oregon on the Oregon Trail."
God, I'd like to recreate this game, but in modern times. So you have to make it from here to Oregon, right? And you only have a car with that'll get you 50 miles with gas and no money in your bank account.
Huh. It's
Yeah, and
too
you can do
real.
side yeah, you can do side jobs on the way, or you can risk hopping on a train and meeting other hobos.
Yeah, or you can, risk hitchhiking,
Oh, yeah, there you go.
and
Yeah,
and
yeah,
then you
and
have
you
the
always end up oh, good.
and then you have the hitchhiking serial killers that, go after hitchhikers. But that
Oh,
was
that's
more from, like,
fair.
the '70s, so
Yeah, yeah, they're probably fine now. I mean, but instead of dysentery, it's replaced with COVID constantly. So
yeah.
you're just always dying of COVID.
Or you're just
Probably
getting
too real.
murdered or oh, man. Or
A
maybe you just,
possibility.
find a new life in
Yeah,
Chicago.
yeah, you just give up, and once you hit Chicago, you're like, "Man, I made it from Maine to Chicago. I am the shit."
It's good enough.
Yeah, yeah. Um, so, n newspapers had gained traction and slowly and steadily became more popular. As an example, in Europe in the 1870s, there were about 6,000 newspapers, and that number doubled to about 1,900 by the end of the century. Um, Now, at this point, I think it's important that we talk a little bit about propaganda. So, propaganda isn't exactly a new concept. It's said that the first recorded attempt at propaganda existed as early as like 515 BC, and multiple accounts of it have been recorded all through history. But the invention of Johann Gutenberg's printing press around 1436 really gave propaganda a new platform to thrive on. So as an example, the Roman Emperor Maximilian the First, who ruled Rome from like 1486 to like 1519, he built up like this incredible postal system and then utilized the printing press in order to create more positive like PR for himself. It was like his entire point of building up this incredible postal system was to, just for PR management. It's like,
I
could you
mean
imagine? It's like,
we have, learned throughout history that propaganda is basically how everything runs. With good
sure,
propaganda, you just do great.
you're doing God's work, really.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and then you just, if you hear bad news about yourself, then you just throw out more information and more propaganda to kind of hopefully drown out that voice, and
Yeah.
that's just how life
Um,
is. I'm glad that we
Yeah.
fixed that now, we no longer have that issue.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, gone are the days where you would light somebody on fire for speaking bad about you, you
You
know?
know,
Yeah.
at
I
least
wonder
that's
if that
gone.
actually yeah. So is the tarring and feathering.
Yeah,
So,
hopefully.
yeah. Yeah.
I'm sure that's still happening somewhere.
I wanna see somebody be tarred and feathered, so I should probably Google that at some point.
There used to be a cooler punishment for, like, kings where, instead of being tarred and feathered, gold would be melted down, and then they would have to pour it into their mouth, and it was like
Ooh.
that was how they got killed, was their own
Yeah, that's
wealth being poured
God.
down their
It
gullet.
brings a whole new meaning to blood money, by the way.
Oh, does it?
No, it's probably the same meaning.
Maybe, liquid molten gold tastes good and it doesn't kill you.
Really just cleans the bowels out, if you know what I mean.
I like that
So
punishment. I think, we should just bring that back. If you do something bad and you're rich, boom, your money is now turned into gold and it's liquid down and
I
you get to swallow it.
I mean, personally, I like the idea of using pennies that are melted down instead,
Mm,
but, yeah.
slot
So
pennies.
and then at the end, like, they 1 penny is put between their fingers and their hand is cast in gold. That way, they can forever be known as a penny pincher.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That's a good one.
I'm good at torture. So, as the newspaper industry began to grow and thrive in like the 18th and 19th century in America, propaganda also began to evolve. So, prior to the Civil War, abolitionists began creating their own periodicals to promote a society without slavery. An example of this is known as like the Freedom's Journal. Um, but it didn't take long for the pro-slavery side to take notice and begin doing the same. And my favorite example of this is something called the Ostend Circular, which is like a periodical that came out, right?
Mhm.
In it, the author took issue with the Missouri Compromise, which was it basically just took slaves in the South away. As in you couldn't, have slaves in the South anymore. And his solution was to invade Cuba and make it a slave state, so that way they could still have slaves.
Oh,
Yeah. I mean, to
nice.
me, it's just so wild that like these guys, they couldn't picture a life without slaves, so their solution was fine. We'll just go take over Cuba and make them our slaves.
I wonder how
You
that
see
worked
what
for
I'm
them.
saying?
Yeah.
I mean, like Cuba's still its own country, so I don't think it
Oh,
worked very well.
yeah, it probably didn't work
Yeah.
out very well.
No. But during this time, propaganda really began to become like a pretty refined process, and slowly it began to change the way advertising, marketing, and public relations were handled. Which, like advertising and marketing, right? That's
Mhm.
just wild, and that just kind of deserves its own episode at some point. So,
And
'cause that
propaganda
really took up.
probably just deserves its own 4 hours of talking about, but
Oh
it's
yeah, probably longer, man. Like we could probably just do an entire episode on propaganda,
yeah.
or sorry, an entire podcast on propaganda.
Oh, yeah, probably.
Yeah. So at the end of the 19th century, there were two pretty influential books about propaganda that came out, which really influenced the writings of Sigmund Freud and Adolf Hitler. So there was this book called Laws of Imitation by, uh, I think it's Gabriel Tardy. Um, Freud really liked that one. And The Crowd, a study of the popular mind by Gustav Le Bon. Um, Hitler's Mein Kampf was really, really heavily influenced by this book called The Crowd. Um, so to give you a little bit of perspective, in the late 19th and early 20th century, newer forms of media began to crop up in Europe and over in America too. But the transatlantic cable, which was responsible for overseas telegraph communication, it had evolved into like more cables of better quality being strung across the ocean, and not just from America to England, but also to Germany and just all over the place. All these underwater cables, right?
Mhm.
The invention of moving picture films had been a thing since like 1895, I think, and movie theaters had started popping up. Um, there were these. I had never heard of this before, but there were these telephone services. One of them that was in the UK is called Electrophone, right?
Mhm.
And it provided users with a special headset, and it would allow them to dial in using a special code to gain access to the news, live theater, music, stories, and religious readings,
That's
right? So
kinda
it's kind of
neat.
like yeah, it was kind of like the radio before the radio, right?
Yeah.
So like, yeah. But in 1905 and 1906, Europe started experimenting with radio for both military use as well as for broadcasting. And a lot of innovations in these broadcasting technology were coming out, and they were coming out fast. And while that was changing, World War One was, right around the corner, right? The so Germany got really into a lot of these newer broadcasting technologies. They had their own transatlantic cables. I mean, most countries that had any waterway, they did. They built one of the world's first radio transmitters. Actually, it's the longest operating radio transmitter in the world, or radio transmitting station. I guess I don't know the specifics of that, but it's been around since like 1906. Germany also had a thriving film industry. And during all this, they created, I'm never going to be able to pronounce this right, but Auswärtiges Amt. I I'm not sure. I'm sure I butchered that name, but essentially it was a federal foreign office responsible for the country's foreign policies and its relationship with foreign countries, right?
Mhm.
Eventually it gained the responsibility for spreading the good word about Germany and creating positive public relations, right? Between,
Yeah, and that seems
Germany
fine.
and, yeah, I mean, there's nothing inherently wrong with that.
No.
But time goes on and Germany enters World War enters the sorry. Time goes on and Germany enters that World War One chat, and some of the responsibility of Germany's Federal Foreign Office shifts rather rapidly towards convincing other nations to either side with Germany in the war or at least to maintain a neutral stance on the war in some instances.
That doesn't
But
seem good.
funnel no, that really doesn't, and I'm gonna go into some examples here, here in a minute, but, funnily enough, though, England figured this out, like, quick, right? Like, they were just on it, and one of their first major actions in the war was to sever Germany's underwater telegram communications cables, so that way they couldn't speak outside the country.
Oh, that seems like a
It's
good
like
idea.
well, it seems like they were trying to broadcast out to the US, and Britain's like, "Nope, fuck you," and they just took an axe right to that cable, like, "What you gonna do about it now, bitch?" Like,
That's one
I
way
just
to do
kept
it.
laugh I just kept laughing about it the entire time because I'm like, "Man, that's kinda smart," right?
Yeah.
But, I mean, it had only been, like, established maybe 70 years prior was the first one, and they had just recently done a bunch of work on it in the past 20 or 30 years, right? So, I mean, it makes sense that first thing you wanna do is blind your enemy's communications, I guess, but I don't wanna linger on this too long, I wanna get back to the news eventually, but I do wanna point out some of these methods this office took in spreading propaganda
Mhm.
and what messages they were trying to spread, right?
Right.
So, the Germans had their overseas telecommunications cable cut, and they relied pretty heavily on their radio tower to get the word out in the interim. Um, in addition to this, they set up mobile cinemas for the troops, that would portray the news and films with a pretty heavy pro-German slant, if you know what I'm saying.
Right.
And here's the really interesting one. They'd go in, they'd occupy these territories, right? And then they'd create or take over newspaper companies, just so that way they could get the good word out about Germany. So, like,
I see no problem
yeah.
with the news right now, actually. It seems like everything's
Our news
going
seems
to
way better than this, right?
yeah, I mean, government-controlled and army-controlled news media that they're taking over, it probably has no, it's probably still unbiased, and it's probably still for the people.
Definitely
Yeah.
for the people. Yeah. So the biggest opposition to these news campaigns were the British, like far and large, right? Um, and they went through the process of dissecting these newspapers and these radio transmissions and noticed some really common trends, right?
Mhm.
So the first one is that they would often proclaim that Germany was certainly going to take names and kick ass. A German victory was going to be certain. And like there was no stopping it, right? Like this was already a thing. Like you might be fighting us, but we've already won. So you might as well just give up, right? So that was the first one. The second one, they explained how Germany was really given no choice in entering this war. Really, Germany was the victim here and fighting a war of defense. So that's number 2. The third one, the enemy had some unethical ideologies and terrible plans in mind for the German people, including a starvation plan for the German civilians, use of dum-dum bullets against German soldiers, which were declared illegal for use in war, right? And I
Mm,
had to look up what those were, right?
yeah.
Because I was like, dum-dum bullets, what the fuck's this, right? Um, but
It it
I
sounds
guess a
like,
bullet.
Dum Dum bullets might be like, weapons of mass destruction, and
Oh,
they have to go over there to prevent weapons of mass destruction.
um, no.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, but you were close. They're a bullet that expands when they impact,
Mhm.
right? And they were deemed unethical by Germany like years prior, for everything except for like hunting, because those bullets dealt some pretty excessive and inhumane wounds, right? So like, somebody would get shot, right? The bullet wouldn't go through, it would get lodged in like their liver or something like
Mhm.
that. And as it got lodged there, it would rip a giant hole in it,
Yeah,
right?
and who's
And the
using these
person
Dum
would
Dum bullets?
whoever the enemy is. So in
Okay.
some instances, it's Belgium. Some instances,
So
it's France.
Germany is saying, "We need to go over to this place because they're using these weapons that we deem bad,
Oh
and
no,
so
this
we
this
need to
goes.
fight them."
They're saying that that really they're being treated inhumane in the war.
Oh.
Because like all the other countries, they just want to team up on Germany and hurt us.
Mhm.
Like they just want to, they want to starve all the Germans,
Oh,
right?
okay.
And
I
that's
see.
not okay.
Yeah.
And they're using these bullets on us, and that's not fair.
Yeah.
You see what I'm
I
saying
see
now?
that. Yep.
Yeah. Um,
That's good propaganda.
yeah. So that's number three.
I was trying to relate that propaganda to, the Bush administration where they're saying that we need to go evade, because of weapons of mass destruction.
Oh, we're gonna get there too.
Oh,
Don't you
okay.
worry,
Oh,
pony
good.
boy. Yeah,
Phew, man,
yeah, but
I was just
yeah.
trying to go, like, learn from history and then, do the same thing.
Oh, we're gonna get there. Don't worry. But yeah, so yeah, it was kind of like that. But I mean, they weren't using it as a reason to expand as much as they were like, well, we have to keep fighting this war because otherwise they're gonna kill us all. So we're really left with no choice again. You see what I'm saying?
Right.
Yeah.
That's effective
But
propaganda still.
yeah.
They probably got a bunch of, people to enlist into the war too.
I mean, yeah. I mean, World War One was huge, so yeah. I mean, I don't know if they had any sort of draft or anything like that,
Yeah.
but I mean, a lot of these things, it wasn't just propaganda against like outsiders um, or well, it wasn't just propaganda for the outsiders. A lot of this was propaganda for the people who are already, you know, there, the German citizens.
Yeah.
So it's just all over the
And
place.
they probably use,
Uh,
like, pro-war propaganda to glorify war and to get people to enlist also. I know that was used in World War II to kind of, like, be a war hero like, the World War One people, and then people be like, "Man, I wanna be a war hero," and then they enlist in World War II, and then they get shot down by a machine gun.
I mean, nationalism is a big part of that. You're absolutely right, which actually leads me into number 4. So, they would gloat about Germany's historic mission to promote the highest cultural standards, which would lead to the finest example of civilization that the world has ever seen, thus celebrating the slogan, work, order, duty, as compared to the enemy's liberty, equality, and fraternity. Um, so that sort of nationalism there that, oh, we're just bringing culture into this. That's really what we're doing. We're giving higher standards to the world. Number 5, Germany was not only going to win the war, but their victory would benefit all of mankind, allowing these poor souls fighting against them to be liberated and also freeing the seas for all nations. Germany sounds great, right?
It does. Um,
Yeah.
I wanna be a German citizen now during World War One.
Just wait until you hear this. Number 6, Germany needed land to expand since they were so awesome. They
Oh,
planned on using this land and their surplus population to increase talent, organizing ability, financial capital, and manufacturing output in all these poor areas.
that's much different than, these people are using these big bullets and harming us.
Right, yeah. Well, I mean, so in their defense, I'm kind of exaggerating this a hair, but I'm doing it for the sake of comedy as opposed to like,
Mhm.
anything else. Um, but I mean, when I was reading it, this was just all that could go through my mind was Germany is awesome. And it's like, okay, Arnold, you came from Austria, but whatever. No, but uh, so the last one, by the way, raw materials were being controlled by Britain and France, and it's unethical for them to hoard wealth and materials like that.
Mhm.
As a result, freeing those materials is going to help everybody, including Germany.
Oh, that
So,
makes sense.
yeah,
I mean, you can't have one
yeah.
nation hoarding everything and then, monopolizing on that and then inflating the price and then charging everyone else a buttload of money for oil. I mean, raw
Yeah.
materials.
Yeah. So, Aaron, just a hypothetical question here that I have written down. Thinking of the news today, does anything about any of these strategies or content sound a touch familiar at all? Like,
Let's see. No, I mean, it sounds like we don't do any of that
oh.
stuff nowadays, and we definitely don't go to, like we definitely don't hear in the news that,
Yeah,
we need to kind of do anything bad to other countries to get raw materials.
right. Yeah, yeah. We've never partaken in anything like that, right?
Yeah, and other
Um,
countries don't
yeah.
do that either. They don't like, for example, Europe won't go to, Africa, and let's say they start like a rubber factory and then enslave like a bunch of people to kind of, you know, harvest all this material to make rubber for pennies.
Get for oh, they're paying them
Yeah,
pennies. They're not making rubber pennies.
they're paying the people pennies, or maybe not even paying them. They might just be
Yeah,
threatening them to like cutting off their hands or something, and
that's a
then
good point.
just forcing them. Yeah, that doesn't happen, and then we don't have issues with like yeah, we don't have that issue actually. This has
Yeah.
probably all been fixed.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
So, and so back to what you were saying a minute ago. So, like, what the Germans would tell each country or their citizens, it kind of varied. They'd usually tell like all their citizens this type of propaganda, right? But
Right.
like if they occupied a territory, they might just, leave some of it out because,
Yeah,
and it might be a
obviously.
little bit too much for them.
Yeah. People might
Um,
be like, "Wait, you're doing what? For what?
Yeah, yeah. Wait,
Is it worth
what do you
it?"
mean that, like, you need land to expand Germany? You step back. This is my land, my farm, my pigs.
I mean, luckily, like, the Ukraine war isn't going on anymore, where Russia wanted to, get that Ukrainian land for, um, to harvest
Yeah, they had a
more
coast.
land or something like
Yeah,
that.
there there was grain, and then they actually had a port there that's pretty important
Mm.
for, trading, and the nuclear power plant that I mean, they could build their own nuclear power plant, don't get me wrong, but, like, to have control over Chernobyl like that, that would
Yeah.
it just makes people uneasy.
Right, I mean,
So,
I vaguely remember or hearing, well, this might just be more propaganda, where Russia wanted to occupy Ukraine because they had better land and they wanted to use that land for food.
yeah. I mean, see, we don't really have a way of fact checking that because I mean, we're obviously not part of Russian intelligence, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? I don't know anybody who works in Russian intelligence, and I wouldn't trust them necessarily to tell me the truth if they did work in
Right,
intelligence.
and then we heard, I don't know, this past I don't know, the election before this, where, Russia was infiltrated our news outlets and then giving propaganda about everything, so, uh
Yeah, I mean, they were trying to influence the election in one way or another, and I mean, that's not the only way that they did that, you know what
right,
I mean?
yeah.
But, like, it is a good point, though. I mean, like, that's kind of a first, really.
Yeah, we don't know
So,
what propaganda is true and what actually is
yeah,
going, and we don't even know what, we don't know what is propaganda and what is news,
right. Yeah,
unless you do your own
yeah.
fact checking in journalism, which is kind of
And
like
then
the whole point of this.
gist of this
Yeah, the whole
yeah,
gist of this is
yeah.
like what
Uh,
can we trust and how do we get accurate information?
you need to check your sources. You ever hear that? Because I hear that, like, every other week that I need to check my
Mhm.
sources, and it's like, I mean, I've checked my sources. I didn't check Newsmax, but I checked my sources.
Right,
Uh,
and
I mean
the Washington's Post, even though it is owned by Amazon, it's supposed to be, it has this long-standing reputation of being independent and impartial journalism, and it's supposed to operate independently of Amazon's business interests, and I have no idea if that's true. It's kinda hard to believe that the Washington Post would be impartial and not have any conflict of interest, seeing as how it's
well,
owned by, you know, Bezos and Amazon, but, I mean,
right, yeah.
maybe it is. Maybe there are good journalists on the Washington Post that are doing unbiased and accurate
Fair
journalism,
reporting, yeah.
and
Yeah, I mean, and that very well could be the case. I mean,
but
it
it also has
it
this, like, so there's this thing in skepticism, or this, like, idea and theory of knowledge and skepticism where there's this infinite regress of knowledge, and when you hear about one source and then you're finding that that source is coming from another source and that source is coming from another source, but like that original source, we don't know if that original source was accurate or not. This usually happens with books, like let's say like an historian said this, and then all the books coming after that going off of that original person, we don't know if that original person's right or wrong. So we don't know if this knowledge is actually correct or not. So if we can't prove the original person is accurate, then we can't know that we actually have knowledge. So it's this weird paradox of infinite regress of like we actually don't have real knowledge of anything.
It's a giant game of telephone
Yeah,
where you can't really identify the real source of it, and for all you know, it was some guy, we'll just call him the village idiot, and
yeah.
we'll name him Tom because fuck Tom. He was my friend on MySpace, and fuck Tom. That's where everybody's telephone game
Tom was a
originates
great
is Tom.
Tom was a great billionaire. I mean, he made MySpace, he collected his billions, and then he just like went off and just
Faded.
did whatever he wanted to do. And like so far away, I haven't heard anything that Tom's done
No,
bad with. He's just been, he did a good job. He's
I
just
don't know.
chilling.
Mark Zuckerberg told me that like he's a bad person,
Uh,
and I trust everything that I read on Facebook.
yeah,
So,
I
yeah,
wonder how the metaverse is doing.
I don't know. Didn't Mark Zuckerberg try that at one point though, where he was everybody's friend, and then like eventually he just kind of faded off? Maybe I'm just imagining
I
that
have
though.
no idea.
I really think that he was. So
I
it
mean,
was either that or I friended Mark Zuckerberg on Facebook, and then eventually I don't remember.
but it's
It's
hard to
probably a fake account.
it's hard to be friends with an AI though.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah,
Yeah, they could snap.
they don't have emotion either,
Uh,
apparently.
oh, well, that's weird. I mean, I don't know.
Oh,
Maybe it's for the better.
maybe.
So anyhow, Germany they did a damn good job with their propaganda, believe it or
Mhm.
not. Like they got a lot of people on board, right? But the British did just like what the Germans did. They just did like 10 times better. Um, because they did like just a crazy good job of gathering intelligence and kind of like saying, okay, well, we realize that your propaganda tends to fall into one of these 7 categories, so we're just going to make claims that kind of dispute these. so, so Britain did have a little bit of what I'll refer to as a propaganda department in place prior to the war, right? But once they realized what Germany was doing, they really vamped up their efforts significantly, right? So within about a month of Britain entering the colloquial World War One chat, they created their own war propaganda bureau. So, like one of the first things they did was they got a bunch of famous authors involved to write books, film scripts, and articles for the news, right? And they targeted this material largely at major influencers of the time. Okay, so like journalists, other writers, directors, that sort of thing, right? In hopes that they then relay the message to their own audience, right? So, just like Germany, they intended to get the message out not just to their own people, but other countries as well.
Oh, that's a good
Um,
idea. To battle
yeah,
propaganda with other propaganda.
right. Yeah, pretty much. Like they're just like, yeah. But I kind of like the British way of doing it because you'll find out eventually they're just like, I don't care what you said. Fuck you. Like it's kind
Perfect.
of yeah. So one of the big things that they do is they'd often use these quote unquote atrocity stories to really get people disgusted in Germany's behavior. Right
Mhm.
now, Germany did some fucked up things when they invaded Belgium during the war, but the reality is that Britain really exaggerated what the German army was doing. Um, so they'd spread rumors of babies on bayonets, right?
Mhm.
Where a German soldier would throw a baby in the air and the Germans would spear it with their bayonet on their rifle as if it was some sort of game, right?
Oh, did that not
Yeah.
happen?
I mean, it might have in some minute cases, but like not really. It's pretty much just a flat out lie. Like I'm sure that there's some fucked up German soldier in World War One who did some really stupid shit, but
I'm
like
sure that happened at some
I
point.
but I mean it might have even just been a British army guy like being like, "Whoa, what if our guys did that? That's kind of fucked." We'll just say it
Yeah.
was the Germans. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? Like
Who
so
knows?
yeah. They'd also talk about how the German soldiers were going around forcing nuns to strip naked and raping them, right? Like the
Mhm.
list just kind of goes on, but it really got a lot of people reacting to it,
Yeah.
which is I mean, it's really not so much different than like clickbait nowadays, right?
Yeah,
Like you
I mean,
see
it sounds exactly like clickbait.
you see the words "babies on bayonets" on a headline for a newspaper, right?
Mhm,
And you're just like, oh shit! Like I gotta figure out what the hell this is about. You know what I mean?
mhm.
Right? And it also had cartoons that were appearing in media of German soldiers with a bayonet, right? Like almost like a political cartoon sort of thing. But it
Yeah.
really got people riled up and drove the point home.
Yeah.
Um,
I right now, I usually can, right now, I consider modern news right now as clickbait. Like, that's what I kind of, compare it to is, our modern news channels and stations and articles. It's just clickbait. They just want as many people looking at it as they can so they can
well, I mean,
monetize on something.
think about commercial breaks, right? Like
Yeah.
you have a story, right? And then you're like, up next, babies on bayonets. Stay tuned after the commercial break to find out more. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like that's
That's a
gonna
great
make you
clickbait.
that would be a great clickbait, right? So
Mhm.
like I mean, honestly, like it's not such a different tactic than what the media is using now. That's just it was used in a slightly different style, if you understand what I'm saying,
Right.
right? Because you read about it, you're going to tell your friends about it, right? And then you're going to
Mhm.
be like, well, I don't know if it's true or not, but it
Yeah.
really got people like real livid with Germany. Like that's a
Yeah.
great way to do propaganda is just lie about like what was happening, right?
Exactly. And you
Yeah.
might not even stay up for, like, the news article, whether you're just like, "Oh, okay, stay tuned for the news article about babies on bayonets," and then you're like, "Oh, man, that's awful," and then you don't watch it, and then you just
Yeah.
go into the newsroom the next day at work, and you're like, "Man, did you hear about the babies on bayonets?" And they didn't watch it either. So
Right,
they're
right,
like,
right.
"Oh, man, that's awful," and then that's it, and then that just spreads the word.
I mean, I forget who said it, but, like, a fake news story on social media spreads 6 times faster than an actual verified news story.
I believe it.
So, like, I mean, and this is exactly how. This is
Yep.
exactly how. So, um, so anyhow, so the US entered the same World War One chat room officially
Mhm.
in 1917. But years before that, the US realized how successful this form of news had been in Europe and created their own propaganda department, which formally evolved to the Committee on Public Information, acronym of CPI. You can Google around for it if you want. But they came up with that committee right around the time that the U.S. entered the war. So largely they use this to get the enlistment numbers up, as well as for war bond sales, which that makes sense. War is expensive, so pay
Yeah.
us a little bit now, and we'll pay you more later.
War
Um,
is expensive. I hear it's profitable too for some people.
for some people, but only if you get those raw materials like oil. I mean,
Oh,
you
also, if
know,
you're selling the war people guns, you're probably making a butt ton of money.
oh, that's fair.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I can sell 'em pipe bombs.
I
9 out
mean,
of 10 will go off.
arms dealership, that I mean, that just sounds like a great business because everyone loves a good war.
Yeah, and nobody's gonna fuck with an arms dealer. They got
No,
guns.
they got a lot of guns. I mean, they're
Yeah, yeah.
literally providing guns to people.
Right, right, yeah,
They
and
got
you
more
don't wanna
guns than you,
yeah, and you
unless
don't wanna
they
burn that
sold all their
bridge.
guns.
Right. Yeah, yeah. In which case, they'll probably just buy more guns with some of that money.
Yeah.
Anyhow, the committee deployed a lot of the same tactics as, like, the British military. They kinda modeled it off of, like, what Britain was doing with this, intelligence committee that they had, right? So
Mhm.
they'd put up posters, like, there's literally one poster where it says, "Britain wants you," and it looks like I don't know. I forget who's on the cover of it. It's probably Winston Churchill, but it shows the guy just staring out there, and like the big words are Britain and you, and it's trying to get people to enlist in the British Army, right? But it
Mhm.
reminded me so much of like the Vietnam campaign where Uncle Sam wants you. He was very
Yeah.
aggressive about it, right? It
Yeah,
it
he's
had that
pointing at
same,
me.
yeah, exactly. I don't think they were pointing. I'll have to find it, but I don't think they were pointing in the British one. But it was just kind of funny to see because it's like, wow, that is largely reminiscent of what was happening over in Britain. Like, yeah, just wild. So,
I'm just glad
eh,
history doesn't repeat itself.
oh, we're gonna get there. It does, but we're gonna get there. So they put up posters. They were making films portraying America in a positive light. I picture like a Team America World Police that actually went really well. There were a couple movies that they were talking about, and I'm like, I've never heard of any of these, but also like not really into like movies from like 1914, 1918 either. And they also, as you might have guessed, got into a little bit of news censorship where if the news was talking about how maybe America shouldn't be involved in the war, nope, that shit's going right out the window. America will do what America wants, and we're going to stomp on the, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's our right to do what we want, whether it to be help a war or not help a war.
Right, yeah, and there's nothing unethical about that. We just want
Yeah.
money. I mean, freedom.
Yeah, and I'm glad we were never on the fence in joining a war.
No,
America loves a good war.
Yeah, we certainly didn't sit this one out for 3 years and then join in the last year when we found out that Germany probably wasn't winning the war.
And it definitely wasn't because we got, bombed.
Yeah, definitely
But,
not that.
yeah.
I mean, yeah, that would be
There was no that had nothing to do with whether or not we were gonna join World War II.
Yeah, I know,
And
right?
we were gonna join anyway, but, like, we were just kinda dragging our feet. And then we're like, "Alright, fine, we'll go now since, you
Right.
just bombed our harbor."
Right.
That's not cool, guys. We were
No,
just
not at
chilling.
all. Yeah. So anyhow, there was a lot of like this big anti-German hysteria that was kind of like spreading like wildfire all over here in the US, right? And daily newspapers were publishing any and all of this information that they could that was coming over that transcontinental media line from overseas, right?
Mhm.
And they'd oftentimes take those stories that the British people were being like, oh, there were babies on bayonets, and they'd make them like 10 times worse. It'd be like, there was a guy who was doing that, and they had a high score count, and there were 3 babies on one bayonet. Like,
Oh my gosh.
yeah. I mean, I don't know if that specific example is true, but you get the idea that they were exaggerating an exaggeration.
Yeah.
So the war ends in 1918, right? Which is like a year after we entered set colloquial chat. Germany lost, by the way.
Oh,
I know
good.
that's yeah.
I mean, they were doing
But
that baby bayonet thing, so I'm glad they lost.
But I heard they were awesome.
I heard they're really good at it, but I'm
Yeah.
glad that they lost because of that thing.
Right,
sometimes you shouldn't be really good at something.
Yeah, like, they got a high score of 4, I heard. But so anyhow, in 1920, this book comes out, right? It's called How We Advertised America, the first telling of the amazing story of the Committee on Public Information that carried the gospel of Americanism to every corner of the globe, which it's not exactly the catchiest title, right?
Mhm.
But it gained a lot of traction and exposed that a lot of the stories that we were spreading over here, particularly that the media was
Mm.
spreading, yeah, they never really happened.
Oh.
So, yeah.
Oh,
So,
crap. So the news was wrong.
Yeah, they were just, like, gobbling this stuff up, like, as soon
Oh,
as a
man.
story would come from overseas, right, it was just kind of spectacular because it's like they'd be like, "Well, we gotta get that to go to the evening print tonight," like, it's like, no fact checking or anything like that. I mean, how could they, They
Right.
just but it's like, "Come on, guys." So, anyhow, there were other news sources that were kind of exposing this Committee on Public Information who they were kinda just, like, putting it out there and just watching them just gobble it up, and they're like, "Okay, we're just gonna keep doing this. This is really helpful for America's financial situation, and we got so many troops now,"
Mhm.
right? So but it left a really bad taste in a lot of Americans' mouths about, about our country's propaganda and the news coverage that we were throwing out there during World War One, right?
Yeah.
And it directly led to, like, the Committee of Public Information being shut down by Congress. Like, they had all these records and stuff, and they're like, "Nope, not even gonna archive that. We're just gonna burn it and pretend it didn't happen." Like
Perfect.
Yeah. So, yeah. So, eventually, radio starts to become popular over here, and I
Oh.
think that's where we can, pick it up at next week. Stay
Oh.
tuned for part 2, everybody.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
Well, that was good. That's a good story.
Yeah.
I'm glad
It's really
I'm
about
glad,
America. Fuck yeah.
I'm glad I'm glad the news has always been, like, great and ethical and unbiased and
And I'm really
nothing.
happy that, like, what we're teaching in schools, by the way, like, really goes over, like, these situations where we're like, "Yeah, we fucked up." Because I always hear these stories about how America fucked up. I remember them in high school, don't you?
Mhm. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I don't really I only hear about, like, a couple of things where I'm like, "Ooh, maybe America should not have done that."
Yeah.
But, I mean, the propaganda is high in what we get taught. I mean, it makes America sound really great, but maybe that's just
Probably not as great as
propaganda.
Germany. Yeah,
Yeah.
probably. I
Uh,
heard Germany's great.
yeah.
I mean, I'm sure Germany's great now. So
Mhm.
they seem to have chilled out after World War II, but that's likely well, up until, like, the 1980s, but that's a conversation for another day.
Yeah.
Gorbachev finally tore down that wall,
Yeah,
so,
or maybe
yeah.
part 2 of this episode. So,
Maybe we'll get there. Actually, it
yeah,
does go a little bit into the Cold War, so yeah, yeah, we'll
yeah.
get there. Yeah.
Well, if you enjoyed this episode, then you can listen to our other episodes wherever you found this episode. Also, if you feel like supporting the channel, you can tell your friends and check out our Patreon. Uh, what else? That's probably it.
Yeah, yeah. Do we have time for a moment from our sponsor?
There might be something popping up at the end of this. Who knows?
Yeah, yeah. Uncle Sam wants you. Oh, it's probably not the sponsor we're gonna get, is it?
Maybe.
Fingers crossed, homeboy. All right. Well, with that said, I'm Ryan.
And I'm Aaron, and bye.